Hi folks, and welcome back to the Scotch Tracker. With us today is writer Melinda M. Snodgrass. She's a New York Times best-selling author and screenwriter of Star Trek The Next Generation. Thank you very much for joining us today, Melinda.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this. We've been having fun backstage, so this should be great.
Cool. So I wonder if we could start by discussing basically the roots of your Star Trek fandom and work, touching on your earliest memories of Star Trek, as well as how you came to write the novel The Tears of the Singers and joined the writing staff with Star Trek The Next Generation.
Okay, well, I fell in love with Star Trek when I was a little girl. I had loved science fiction. My dad read aloud to me, at bedtime. And the first book I remember him reading to me was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And he read all the cool stuff and left out all the fish stuff, because I was like, cool. And I just fell in love. And he taught me to read before I went to school because he was a huge reader. And then the very first book I ever read all by myself was A Princess of Mars. And I was hooked. I mean, science fiction, especially science fiction, but fantasy somewhat was my thing. And there was no visual representation of it. And suddenly this starship, came across my television. And, I'm old, so it was the original series. And I fell in love with it. I mean, Kirk and Spock and McCoy and that relationship and the ship and Uhura. And so from that moment on, I was completely, besotted with it. I was like, I would avoid going out to dinner with my parents so I could stay home and watch Star Trek, and they were like, you're too little to be left alone. I was like, but because I didn't want to miss it. And, flash forward, life goes on. I grew up, and I was a deeply unhappy lawyer. I was trained as an attorney, went through law school, practiced law for 3 years, loved the study of law, hated lawyers, basically. And my dear friend at the time, a man named Victor Milan, was a novelist, science fiction novelist. And he said to me, I bet you could write if you tried. And so I started writing in secret, and Vic would read my chapters. We'd always meet at night, like at midnight at the Vips Big Boy. I don't know why at midnight, but that was what we did. And he would go over my chapters and tell me what was wrong, and I'd rewrite. And then, eventually I started getting published, but I was trying to still make a living after I'd quit the law firm. And so I was writing romance novels under pseudonyms to pay my mortgage while I was still working on this big science fiction series I was writing. And I was at a science fiction convention, and I got introduced to the then editor of the Star Trek novels lines, a man named David Hartwell. And David said, I understand you want to get into writing science fiction. And he said, I am editing the Star Trek line. And he said, you seem like you really love it. Send me a proposal. And so I sat with Vic, and we kicked around ideas for this. And I knew I wanted to focus on Uhura. I loved her. And especially I loved her because she was a singer. Because before I became an unhappy lawyer, I studied opera in Vienna, Austria. I wanted to be a great opera star, except I'm kind of not built for it. I'm a little on the small side. And my voice was good, but it wasn't superb. So, those scenes where Uhura would be singing and Spock would be playing the Vulcan harp and somebody else would be playing chess in the rec room, I loved those moments. So I knew I wanted to write about her. And Vic and I sort of did this analysis of Star Trek. There was the hard edge, balance of terror Star Trek. And then there was the soft and fuzzy Star Trek. And I wanted to go more toward the soft and fuzzy Star Trek. So I wrote a book that's kind of really basically about baby space seals. That's the one. Baby space seals getting murdered by hunters. And Uhura, I turned in the novel, and I believe it was the very first Star Trek novel to ever go on the New York Times bestseller list. Which was kind of cool. But then Hartwell, David, gave me some really interesting advice. He said to me, never, if you don't want to spend your life writing media tie-in novels, never write another one. Because he said, if you do, you're going to get typed there. And I know you have your own work you want to do. And so I rather religiously followed that advice, and I never wrote a second one, even though, especially when I was working on the show, I was offered the opportunity to write another Star Trek novel. And I said, nope, David Hartwell told me not to do that, so I'm not going to do that. And that way I got to do my own work, which naturally, because I'm so terrible at self-promotion, I forgot to have any of the books here available. They're all sitting in the bookcase of my own novels. But anyway, that's how I came to write Tears of the Singers. And it worked, because then I sold the science fiction series I was writing, that sold after that, because suddenly I was perceived as somebody who could write science fiction. So that's it.
And then how did you join the writing staff of TNG?
Okay, well, I have been fortunate in my friends. I had Vic telling me, I bet you could write if you tried. And I got to know this little known writer that we have high hopes for, a guy named George R.R. Martin. George moved down to Albuquerque, out to New Mexico, and we all got together and became friends. And we were in a role-playing group together, playing, rolling dice and playing, Super World night after night. And George had gone off to Hollywood to work on Beauty and the Beast, and first the new Twilight Zone, then Beauty and the Beast. And he called me one day and he said, hey, Snod, that's his nickname for me. He said, hey, Snod, I think you'd be really good at this screenwriting thing. And if you write a spec script, I'll show it to my agent. Mm-hmm. So I looked around at the landscape, and I thought about LA law, but it looked like it was too tightly plotted for me to sort of slide something in. And I didn't want to do anything for Beauty and the Beast, because I thought that would really put George on the spot, because I might really suck. What if I wrote a terrible script? And then he would have to tell me it was terrible, or he would show it to his boss and they would go, this is terrible. Why did you bring this to me? So I thought, well, wait a minute, this new Star Trek show has started, and I've always loved Trek. So I decided to write for Next Generation. And I'm going to tell you that George gave me the single best piece of writing advice I've ever gotten. George was explaining to me that back when I broke in, you write a spec script, he said to me, you never, ever, ever sell your spec script. It is just a calling card. All it does is show a producer or a showrunner that you can write. And if they like the script, then they'll have you come in to pitch. And so you should, have some pitches prepared. And I called George and I said, I've got this idea and I think it's really good. And if it's never going to sell, I don't want to waste it. And I don't want to use it as a spec. Maybe I should hold it for the pitch and write something else. And George said to me, never hoard your silver bullet, meaning shoot the very best thing you got. Lead with the very best thing you have, the thing you are most passionate about. And so he said, write the one you want to write, the one that you think is the best. And that was The Measure of a Man. So I wrote the script and then, sent it to George, who gave it to his agent. And then the writer's strike of 88 hit. And everything shut down for 6 months, and I forgot about it. I just went back to writing books and riding my horses and living my life. And then when the strike ended, the agent called and said, I sent your script to Star Trek, which, by the way, is unusual. Normally, you never send a spec script to the show it's written for, because the outside writer never quite gets the voices correctly. And so it could hurt you. So you would send it to a somewhat adjacent show. Like if you wrote an LA law script, you'd send it to, The Defenders or something else. You would not send it to that particular show. But she went ahead, sent it to Trek, and she said they want to meet you. So I flew out to LA and I had my pitches ready, and I'm sitting in Maurice Hurley's office with my little 3x5 cards, sweating through my 3x5 cards. And, he asked about my background, and then I said, well, I have some other pitches, Mr. Hurley, blah, blah. And I said, and I would like to, and he went, shh. And he pointed at this whiteboard over his desk, and there on the shooting schedule was The Measure of a Man. So I sort of floated back to George's office at Beauty and the Beast, which was just down the street from Paramount, and announced to him I had sold the spec. And then I got called back to come back later for notes, script notes. So I went back to LA, and we did a 3.5-hour session where they gave me notes on the script, changes that needed to be made for production. And at the end of the 3.5 hours, Maury said, I'm hiring you and you start on Monday. And this was Thursday. So he said, get home and get yourself back out here. So I did. And that was how I ended up on the show. And I'll tell you the funny thing is that one of the major notes was I had to rewrite the teaser to Measure of a Man. The teaser I had in my spec was Data learning how to swim, because I thought he could read everything, and you read about it, and then he gets in a swimming pool, and according to Sternbach and Okuda, who are the tech guys on Star Trek, Data weighed 400 pounds. So he gets in the water, sinks like a stone. And then walks out. And the producers and Maury said to me, we can't do it. He said, first of all, we're terrible at going on location. We suck at that. And he said, also, all of Brent's makeup will wash off. So come up with something else. And so I came up with a poker game. And that's how that all started. It was desperation,
Chris, I know you've got some questions about Measure of a Man.
Oh, yes. I was just wondering how you found the process of trying to balance the legal aspects with the plot demands.
I actually didn't find it that difficult. I think partly because almost all lawyer shows are vastly fiction anyway. I mean, just, they're so fictionalized that it bears little resemblance to what life as an attorney actually is like. So I knew to focus on the drama and less on that other. And the other thing that really helped me, I had a good friend at the time who was a retired naval fighter pilot. And he asked me, we were having lunch together, he asked me, what are you working on? I told him about this spec script. And he said, well, if a ship is at sea and we can't go to the JAG, he said, we have a process aboard the ship where the captain always defends and the first officer always prosecutes. And that was like the perfect piece, because suddenly I had conflict, which honestly, Next Generation was woefully lacking in conflict. And so I could pit Picard and Riker against each other, just because of this one, helpful hint from this friend of mine. And I really think that gave the script just a whole other level of power. And I think Jonathan was just wonderful, in that. He just knocked it out of the park. I mean, when you're up against Picard, up against Patrick with his Shakespearean thing. But I really, really thought Jonathan did a beautiful job. So.
We have a question coming in from YouTube.
Yes, I did have a very short window to write the Guinan scene. That was not originally in my script. Guinan wasn't in my script. I had been more focused on this court battle. And I had started working. I was, had my little office on the 3rd floor up there. And Maury called me down and he said, we've been looking over Whoopi's contract. And she's guaranteed, I don't remember, 13 episodes out of 22, whatever it was. And he said, we realized if we don't put her in this episode, we won't meet our contractual obligations. So we need a Guinan scene. You have to put Guinan in the script. And he said, oh, by the way, you've got 3 hours. You know,
Wow.
because we were in pre-production. I mean, all the people who have to build a set and figure out the timing and they all needed to know what was going to be there. So I went upstairs and I like paced in circles in this closet of an office that I had. And then I got the idea that she is, because I knew she's very ancient. Nobody really knows a lot about Guinan's background. It was very mysterious. And I thought, okay, so she's the advisor, the mentor to Picard. And then the scene started to come to me. And I went back down into Maury's office, and I said, what about this? And then, as you do in a writer's room, even though it was just the 2 of us at that point, you just sort of, talk it through, kick through ideas and expand and, massage the thing. And then he said, you got it, go write it. So I did. And it was the most useful, fortuitous thing, because I think it is the scene. It's the heart of that script. And it wouldn't have existed except that it was the cold, hard business. We have to put this actress in this episode. And yet it, pushed for something that was greater than,
Awesome.
than the underlying reason for it. So that's how the Guinan scene, the Guinan Picard scene came to be. And
Cool.
It's hard for me to watch it because it's so powerful that it really gets to you, because they are so good in that moment.
I got a question. Can I ask a question,
Yep.
Damon, or?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So before I ask my question, I wanted to say that Measure of a Man is one of my favorite episodes. And I also wanted to say thank you. And the reason why I'm saying thank you to you and to the other writers of Star Trek, in particular, who wrote those human interest stories, it was one of my influences to become a sociologist. So I wanted to thank you. You and others, to writing those episodes, because as I was growing up, because Next Generation came out when I was in the 4th grade. I grew up on Star Trek. My parents are Trekkies, but it helped influence me to become a sociologist and asking those what ifs, and just Measure of a Man, heart of that episode, along with other episodes, made you think about social issues that helped influence me to become a sociologist. So I wanted to first thank you, sincere thank you for the influence.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes. And as for my question, I wanted, what was the influence to write this episode? Was there, because you talked about your lawyer background, was there something in your past that helped influence to write this episode? Because it's a very heavy episode.
Yeah.
What
inspired me was an infamous Supreme Court decision called Dred Scott. Dred Scott v. Oh God, I can't remember the plaintiff. But at issue was whether a runaway slave was a person or property. The man's owner had taken him into a free territory, and Dred Scott said, "All right, I'm in a free territory. I am no longer a slave. I'm no longer property." And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled that he was indeed property. It's one of those blots on American jurisprudence. Slavery is America's original sin, and we still haven't dealt with it. And this was just one of those examples. And so when I was trying to think of what I would write for my spec, I realized that Data was the perfect avatar to carry that story. Because yes, he is in fact, thank you, Sanford. Thank you, Art. Yes, he is an officer. Yes, he went through the academy, but you could argue that it was Starfleet trying an experiment. Well, let's see if this toaster, what can the toaster actually do? And so, and then he is on the bridge, but when it comes down to it, and I gave, I put the line of, the computer of the enterprise can't just suddenly say, I'm not feeling it today, guys. I don't want to answer your questions. I don't want to manage the shields. Yeah, no, I'm having a moment here. And so it was sort of fun when I had Bruce Maddox sort of articulate that, and let those questions play out. So, I suppose you could argue that if they wouldn't have made him an officer if he wasn't actually ruled a person, but I think it still works. I really do, because honestly, he is a machine, and machines can break and machines can be replaced. So.
Yes, I really like that scene where the on-off switch. That I really like where Riker struggled. Like, I'm sorry, like he didn't want to do it, but he had like trying to prove his point.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to win. I mean,
right.
On some levels, I think there is a rivalry between Picard and Riker that never really got, I never understood why poor Riker didn't just say, they're giving me a garbage scow and I'm going to be the captain. I'm there for it. I don't know why he kept staying there. But, also I don't know why, because the actor wanted a job, and Jonathan, deserves anything he got because he's wonderful. But it was very frustrating in terms of character development. It felt very unreal to me that he wouldn't go, oh yeah, I totally, want my own ship. So, and again, my thanks to Okuda and Sternbach, who, because I said to them, is there an on-off switch? And they said, absolutely. Oh, yes. They had already established it existed. And so I was like, oh, good. Torture the characters. Here we go.
Bob, you had a question?
Yes. Melinda, I love your quote that you have for describing your process in plotting about plot is the shit that happens, theme is why it matters. And I was just wondering if you would describe your process in plotting books and in contrast, working on screenplays and how they differ. I understand you even pick out a different colored pen for the different characters and antagonists. I don't know if you still do that. That was fascinating to me.
Yes, as a matter of fact, behind me is a whiteboard with the beginning.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
With the beginning of the outline for a new novel that I need to write. And there's a cork board in the living room with another novel with the outline on it, partly worked through. Actually, I had always been an outliner because I think the legal training made me, want to have process. But it wasn't until I went to Hollywood that I really learned these techniques. And in a writer's room in Hollywood, it's called breaking a story. And this is how we do it in the biz. I mean, you're in the writer's room with other writers. You have whiteboards or cork boards and 3x5 cards. And somebody has an idea for an episode. They say, hey, what if we did an episode about, whatever, Troy and Riker decide to get married, whatever. And then you say, okay, we think that'll work. And the hires up say that looks good. Then you go and you start outlining it. And in television, most screenplays right now are a teaser and 5 acts. And that's how we were on Trek. Honestly, I think it's agony. I prefer a teaser and 4 because if you've got 5, you're having to come up with 4 exciting, things that don't allow people to change the channel. And so, but that does seem to be the standard right now in the industry, is everything is teaser and 5. And so you put those up on the board, and then you assign a different colored pen to each character. And the reason for that is that you can visually see if you lose track of a character. We had one episode where we looked up, we were all, Ira was sort of, cheerleading up by the whiteboard. He was doing all of the printing. Nobody would let me write on the whiteboard because A, I'm short and I couldn't reach high enough, and I have terrible printing. And we looked up and we realized that the Troy blue color just vanished at the end of the second act. She was just gone. And we were like, oops, we need something for Marina to do. We better figure out some moments here. The other thing that does for people, I brought this technique back to my writers group in New Mexico after, in one of my breaks from Hollywood, because it works great for novels too. I mean, the biggest difference is in a screenplay, you put up every single scene. Everything that's going to happen in an act is there. You can't really do that in a novel because you need 6 whiteboards. But you can put in the big major scenes, the big beats, what I call tentpole scenes. And we were working on a friend's novel. Actually, it was Daniel Abraham's fabulous fantasy series called The Dagger and the Coin. And we were breaking the first novel and then kind of sketching out the later novels to follow. And there was this talk of a love interest, and so we kept trying to put this character in, and he had like a green pin, I think was his, and he just wouldn't stick. He just kept vanishing. And finally I said, maybe it's the wrong character. Maybe you don't need this guy. He's the wrong guy. And then we realized we were all kept going back to and talking about this widow whose husband had been executed by, as a political enemy. And we swapped her in place of the love interest, and she just flew through the outlines. We just knew exactly what to do with her. And so that's another advantage to the color coordinating. It's not only your brain, but your eyes. You have a visual reference to what's working and what's not. And the quote that's my crude version of my quote. Depending on the audience, if I'm lecturing high school students, I usually say, plot is the stuff that happens.
I wanted to quote you exactly.
Yeah, I was on a panel with a bunch of guy screenwriters, and it just sort of came out of me, and I realized, yeah, that really is the essence of fiction. I mean, Dashiell Hammett, I believe, said, what is interesting in fiction is the human heart in conflict with itself. And I can't start a project unless I know A, how it ends, and B, what it's about. What's the theme? What is this? What am I saying about the human condition? And if I know those two things, then I know I have a story. If either one is missing, I put it aside, because maybe it's never going to work, or maybe after some cooking it will work. I just need to let it, process a little longer and see if it comes to me. So that's my process. And I had written it up in a, I had done it in a series of tweets, and then I actually put it into an essay sort of, and put it up on my blog. Website. So if you're interested, you can find, I think it's called How I Write.
Yes, I read through that. I enjoyed reading that and seeing how that you make sure you have your climax in place before you do that. You start with the end,
I mean, that's the other trick we learn in Hollywood is we plot backwards. We don't plot literally through it. We plot backwards. I put up the final climactic scene, then I put in the teaser. Robert Heinlein once said the opening of a book, or in a screenplay, the teaser, and I do teasers in books as well. He said, this is the page you have to convince people to buy the book rather than a 6-pack of beer. So, what is the thing that makes them go, yeah, I'd rather have this? And so, and then you go and put in the end of Act 1, the end of Act 2, the end of Act 3, or 4, however many. My books are normally a teaser at 3 acts. I think if you're writing a big fat fantasy novel, you would probably have like 5 acts, or maybe longer, depending on the size of the big fat fantasy. But for the kind of, I write around 100,000 to 120,000 word books, and 3 acts seems to be about the right amount.
So 3 of the 5 episodes that you're credited with writing for The Next Generation, i.e. The Measure of Man, which we've spoken about, but also Pen Pals, where Data has basically develops a friendship, and then sends a command exploring a romance for Data sort of thing. featured Data in the key role. So I wondered, was there a reason for this? Like, did you feel particularly connected to that particular character?
Yeah, he was. I mean, I've always said it's rather sad that the most interesting character on the show is a robot. Um, and, that's sort of the way I've always felt. I loved him because he had the most room for growth and for exploration. And, I will say, Ensigns is like the only time a script of mine has been rewritten by other writers. There was just some stuff that went on around that script. But if you're interested, my version of that script is up on my website under writings. So if you want to read my version of Ensigns of Command, it's there and available to you. I mean, Data was challenging because I had been told that Data was needed to get laid again in that episode. Yeah, that was one of my directives from my boss. So because as Gene kept telling us, he was fully functional in every way. So I went up to my office to try to figure out, how do you convince a very logical machine that it ought to go to bed with this girl? And so you will see how he walks through the logic analysis when you look at my script. Yeah, it was an interesting time. But no, I love the character because he was growing, he was learning, processing new things. And so I kind of wrote this Data triptych, with Pen Pals. And Pen Pals was based on a story by Hannah Lee Shearer, and it had just been an outline, and Maury gave it to me to write. He said, turn this into a script. And I also did, if you ask Brandon, I actually wrote the child. I mean, it was a freelance script. I did the rewrite of it because we always rewrite freelancers most of the time. So,
And it was originally a Phase 2 script as well.
Yeah, it was, another Data script. So, I just loved writing for him. And, if I had an idea that I wanted to write I wanted him to have to premeditate and commit murder. I was curious about, because the idea of AI, and I mean, because Elon Musk is convinced they're all going to kill us. If AI ever develops, it will go, oh, look, they're ants, let's crush them. And I once said to him, I think they might think we're pets. If we're lucky, we'll be pets, and it'll be okay. But I sort of wanted to play with. I liked Data, and Brent did such a wonderful job with the character. So
cool.
Aaron, you had a question?
I did. I was just wondering, well, first of all, there's a lot of layers in The Measure of a Man between Philippa and Picard, and I was wondering if that was intentional, the way it was written, because their relationship is beautiful and it seems very, very complicated, and I quite enjoyed that, and I was wondering what the inspiration behind that was.
I did. Yes, I had a whole backstory that never, you never play the backstory. You just hint at it because that makes it cool. If you play it, then it should be the story. I wanted more powerful women available in Trek, honestly. And there weren't enough of them. I mean, Marina had to play the therapist, and Gates had to play the healer. And they didn't know what to do with Tasha Yar. I mean, they seem to think that violence made a woman strong, and that's not what actual strength is. And so I wanted Picard to have an adversary who could challenge him, who was as equally powerful, equally self-assured as he was. And they do have a past. I think they dated. They were lovers for a brief time. And then, he screwed something up, and she was part of his court martial. She was a prosecutor on his court martial. He was acquitted, he was found to be not having, but, and she was like, yeah, back in the day when that happened, when he was a young lieutenant or whatever he was at the time, and they were together, and she was like, yeah, I know we've had this great relationship, but this is my job, and we have to get to the bottom of that event, that thing that happened where you're being brought up on charges. So I had all that in the background, and they just did it beautifully. I mean, the subtext and the between them, and the sort of, yes, we're still really attracted to each other, but man, I'm still really mad at you, Philippa. It was just fun. It was fun to do and have that. And I knew all of that, but it just, I left them. I love writing novels.
I think it translated well because they did an incredible job acting it out. And I mean, whenever somebody mentions that episode to me, that's one of the first compelling things about the episode that sticks out to me is how well done that is.
This is the reason I love writing screenplays. I mean, I enjoy novels. I really do. And I love writing them. But to write a screenplay and know that you're going to have actors who can carry that for you. I mean, a good actor can save you half a page of dialogue. They can just do it with a look. And when you've got actors as good as we had, one single line of dialogue and one look, and a whole story has been told in that moment. And that's just one of the things I love about this particular career. So.
Cool. We've had quite a few questions about like current track that's been televised. Like, if we can find it here. For example, if you've seen Star Trek Picard.
Okay, I have a confession.
Yeah.
Picard is the first Star Trek television I have watched since I left the show. And the only reason I watched it was because I started getting messages from fans and followers that it was based on Measure of a Man. My friend Rick Manning, who I was in the writer's room, said once that Star Trek put the S and the T in PTSD, and that's really true. And so when I left the show and I said I wanted to come home at the end of the third season, I'd never watched another episode of Trek. I know Ira did a brilliant job with Deep Space Nine because Ira is brilliant and is someone I consider a mentor who really taught me a huge amount about screenwriting. But I can't go back there. I just couldn't. I was ambivalent about Picard. I think it started out very, very powerfully, and then I think it got lost somewhere. It lost its way. Data's ultimate death. That was a moment that I did like. But I think one of the things I kept thinking, if this had been my show, I mean, and I understand that, Patrick is wonderful and he's always associated with Picard, but I just didn't understand why they didn't download that personality into some fabulous new young British actor like James McAvoy or, fill in the blank. And then have Patrick be, I mean, you could even have him, do the Ghost in the Machine scenes. You could still have him there talking to his younger, in a sense, advising his younger self. And he could still be an executive producer. But I was like, why did you miss that opportunity? I mean, I don't understand that to this day. And I was also left going, yeah, but the big tentacle things are still coming because they sent the message. So, I mean, I'm not sure how you solved the problem, guys. But yeah, so it was, to me, it was a mixed bag. And again, some of this was new to me because I didn't know 7 of 9. I'd never seen an episode of.
Right, yeah.
I was just cool. She's neat. I like her.
Yeah. quite a few people have asked if you have any thoughts on how they sort of reuse the character of Bruce Maddox in Picard.
I was disappointed. In some ways, I don't know why they didn't go and cast the original actor. He might not have agreed, but he teaches theater at a university in California. And I kept wondering, the guy they did cast, I kept wondering when he got a permanent. That was the major thing I kept looking at. I was like, he had this sleek black hair, and now he has a fro. And I was like, oh dear. I wish he could have hung around longer. He was a MacGuffin, clearly. And I was a little sorry. And again, I think part of this is being a lawyer. I was like, and I liked the cute little blonde. I mean, the cute little blonde she was a fun character, and then she's a murderer, and everybody just kind of goes, yeah, it's okay, it's cool. I was like, you murdered somebody. I don't care you were having an episode, you should at least be brought. I mean, there should be some kind of, legal system that says, hey,
yeah,
it's okay. So yeah, I was a little bit, it was an odd thing, I will say.
Right.
As a writer, just a quick question. As a writer, when you saw Bruce Maddox, one of the characters you created, from your writing, but is there like a loss by a writer? Like, oh, one of my characters died.
No, I mean, I figured he was doomed anyway. I mean, it was. My guess was that he was born to die. Yeah. Partly, I try not to be too protective of characters.
Okay.
And especially because in television, because I don't own this, they do. I mean, I think the only thing I regret is that we didn't have enough time with that character for it to matter. Death should have consequences. I co-created and I co-edited a series of books with George called Wild Cards, and it's a superhero thing we do. And in our universe, death is permanent. It's not like the comics where you can retcon and somebody can come back, because death should have meaning. And my feeling as a writer, whether it's television or books, it's unfair of me to ask my reader or viewer for an emotional reaction and then tell them that it doesn't matter. Didn't matter. Told you. I think that's cheating and a really fun. I mean, when Doctor Who, oh God, why am I blanking? Was it Sarah? I mean, they had this amazing episode with the crow and the blackbird and I mean, it was so powerful. I was in tears. And then I find out they're just going to travel through time forever, so she never actually dies.
Yeah, Clara. Yeah.
Clara, thank you. I couldn't remember which one of the characters it was, but I was so offended by that because it
was a cheat. Yeah.
Cheat. I mean, let her die and let it have some meaning and let it affect this ancient person, this entity, the Doctor, have some consequence. So, and that was the thing. I mean, we find out that Maddox and, cute blonde were lovers, but again, we have no sense that this is a torment, that this is difficult for her, the impact it has on her. I mean, it just, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wish they would have put out Bruce Maddox just a little bit more to give him a little bit more background. And I think it just would have been really good. And in a way, just continue Measure of a Man just a little bit further, like a little continuation of the after effects of that trial.
Well, I mean, he was so fascinated with Data that he was almost in love with him. And that he spent his life trying to recreate this perfect thing.
Right.
So, yeah, I wish he'd had a few more scenes before he croaked.
Right, yeah.
But,
Aaron has a question about Maddox.
Yeah, I was wondering if they paid you to use that character on Picard.
No, unfortunately. I thought I was going to get the character payment.
Right. Aren't they supposed to do that?
Well, unfortunately, there in one of the negotiations for our new contracts, they had changed that so that the character has to be the significant major character of a sequel. It's no longer, because it used to be a nice little sort of addition for writers that, if you created a character, they appeared in a few more episodes, you got $300, $500. It was like a nice little bonus. Now, if the character isn't like the major character, you don't get anything. So no,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the hardest, I'm going to be very honest about this. The hardest thing to me was the fact that at no point did anyone ever tell me they were developing this based on measure. I mean, just being informed, would have shown, I guess I think of it as a courtesy,
Yeah.
To have said, and one of my friends who was a Trek writer said, when they did Wrath of Khan, they credited, was it Block? I can't remember who the original writer of.
You're not only deserving of that. I feel like you're entitled to that.
Well, again, I'm going to get a little woke here. Bear with me, folks. It is not uncommon for women to be erased off their own creations. That just is a fact. I mean, that is a reality that we're pushing against, and we're saying, hey, I mean, in some ways, it felt like even Dorothy Fontana, who was so pivotal in creating some of the greatest episodes of original Trek. And City on the Edge of Forever, which is probably one of my all-time favorite Trek episodes, she wrote that. Harlan's script was, Harlan was way off base, with what Trek was. It was Dorothy who rewrote that script and put everything in it that made it so powerful. And yet, again, it's DC Fontana, and she, there is this. So yeah, I wish they could have credited, based on the episode measure of man by. That would have been nice.
I appreciate you, by the way, being very outspoken about, the way that women writers are perceived, because it is a problem, and the only way that it's going to change is if we have an open dialogue about it. So I really appreciate your candor.
Well, thank you. I debated because, the tendency is always don't rock the boat, don't be viewed as a problem, don't be difficult. We hear that a lot. We are so difficult. But I do feel that, especially with Me Too and Harvey Weinstein and all the things that have come out, and Whedon and all the rest, it's time to stop, just smoothing this over and covering it up. So, yeah. And yes, you're right. It's not just writers. It's everywhere.
I know. I looked at that and thought, ain't that the truth?
Mm-hmm. So we had better than when I started out as a lawyer. Let me promise you.
We had the question about whether you fancy writing for Strange New Worlds, basically.
If they called, I'd be there. I was on a panel at a convention, and they said, which of the captains would you want to serve under? And I think I took everybody aback because I said Captain Pike. And they were like, what? And I was like, look, this is the man who Spock so admired and so cared for that he risked his career. He was the man who could make Spock smile. That's one hell of a guy. Who is that man? I want to know that guy. He must have been amazing. And so, I sure, if they, hey, CBS, I'm here, Paramount, I would do it, because I just think he's such an interesting figure.
Melinda, you wrote the 1996 pilot Star Command, also known as In the Fold. Was that for UPN? And what was the process like with that? And it's unfortunate that didn't go forward because it had elements of Starfleet Academy and The Expanse, prior to that all. But,
Well, it was really, I learned a lot because I ended up just sort of by accident becoming the executive producer on it. And I clung to the people who knew what they were doing to help me. it was interesting in that we were the first foreign production to go into the former East Germany to shoot in Potsdam. So we had a whole lot of issues with that. I mean, funny stories. I did not want a robot in that damn script. I fought against the robot, and I wanted to use CGI because I said, just make it a thing that looks like a Swiss Army knife and floats around and does stuff, please. And then of course they didn't. And I will say the Germans, they don't do anything by halves. The set could have withstood a bombardment. It was supposed to be movable, and they built this gigantic robot that was radio controlled, and they lost control of it one time, and I had actors leaping for their lives, as this robot was roaring down. And my director, I kept saying to this gentleman, my scripts shoot very fast. They do. They shoot a little bit more like a Sorkin script. They tend to move quite quickly. And he didn't believe me, and he kept dropping scenes. And so when we finally cut the thing together, it was 10 minutes short. So we ended up having to pad it with, special effects. And the effects had to be completely redone because they hired an architectural firm in Dresden to do the effects, and they'd never done effects. So it looked like spaceships flying through kibble. I mean, it was, yeah. So, I wish it had gone to series. I think we could have smoothed things out, with a little more practice. And I had.
Was it for UPN? Which network was it for?
It was UPN, which lasted.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
It lasted, all of 5 minutes. And so that was a problem. And there were tensions between Paramount and between UPN, the woman running development and the guy running UPN, and personalities, they always get in the way. At some point, maybe we should have those AIs to go, no, we must, let's just do this logically. It was fun. I learned a lot, and I have some fond memories of it. Doing what I could, but I still am like, please don't drop scenes. Just, we'll cut it. Let's shoot them at least. But it was also interesting because, the wall had rather recently come down. So we would drive from Berlin to Potsdam, and we had an American line producer, and then we had a German line producer, and the German gentleman had actually run the studio, the UFA studio. But he explained to me once, there was one day when the very first day of shooting, we stopped at 5 o'clock. Suddenly everybody started packing up. And Artie, my American line producer, and I were literally in front of the doorway going, no, you can't leave. We're not done shooting yet. And then the German gentleman came to me. He said, under the communists, it didn't matter how long it took to make a movie. He said, I once shot a movie for 12 years, So it was an interesting dichotomy. Our young assistants loved the changes. They were, and the older people were, it was very dislocating. It was very hard to go from a society where, everything was one way and suddenly it's competition. So we had our problems, but it was, again, a fascinating experience, so I'm glad I had it.
So I noticed before the interview today that you tweeted a picture of yourself meeting Nichelle Nichols. So
Right.
I wondered what that was like and what the circumstances were and stuff.
It was at Comic-Con a few years ago, and I had never met her, and I just wanted the opportunity to tell her that in some ways she launched my career. I wrote The Tears of the Singers because of her, and that was the start of my science fiction writing career. So I just wanted the chance to thank her, and it's heartbreaking what the situation she's in now, and I really hope it all gets resolved.
She's a lovely lady. I got to meet her as well. Lovely lady.
Yeah, just so gracious and so.
Yes.
So are you working on anything currently you'd like to promote?
Yes. Well, I have this big space opera series called Imperials. It's a 5-book series. The 5th book is finished because I always end things. It'll be out next year, but all 4 books are available. Amazon, iBooks, Barnes & Noble. Amazon will even print one for you if you like dead trees. So I have that series. I have an urban fantasy series about a young woman lawyer working in a vampire law firm. That's the outline that's on the whiteboard, is for that 4th and final book in that series. Yeah, I mean, I'm writing books. I have a television pilot that, we're hoping to set up someplace, and I'm busy. It's good. I'm enjoying what I'm being able to create, do the things I want to do. But and you can see the books I have available. Go to my website. You'll see a list of things, and I'm very active on Twitter and Facebook, and I'm not very good at Instagram because I'm a word person, not a picture person. So I always forget to take pictures of things. But if you have questions or you just want to say hey, you can send me an email through my website, and I always answer because I had a lot of mentors and I had a lot of people who helped me. So if I can pay it back or pay it forward, I'm happy to do it. So
Chris actually has questions about writing rituals.
Yeah, I was just curious to see if you had any strange rituals that weren't related to writing, but things that you did that you found helped you when you were writing something.
Physical activity. Writers tend to be too sedentary. I go and ride a horse 6 days a week. I have a Grand Prix dressage horse, and it gets you out of your head. It allows me to sort of let my subconscious work. If I'm stuck on a scene or stuck on an outline, if I go take a hike or go to the gym before COVID or go ride, I usually come back and the answer's there. So I really recommend just, getting out of the chair, getting away from the computer and going and doing something else. I can't function without coffee. I have to have a cup of coffee in the morning. And I guess the biggest advice I can give people is set up a routine, treat it like a job, because it's a job. I don't wait for the muse to come talk to me because she's kind of a notorious bitch and she doesn't show up when you want her to. That's another reason I outline, because I look at the outline, go in the morning with my cup of coffee, I look at my outline and I know exactly what it is I need to write that day. I'm not floundering around going, well, I don't know, what do I do next? It's there. So that I can be very disciplined about it. I just think that's part of the key.
Okay, thank you.
We've got a question from Art about Wild Cards movie.
Well, it's not going to be a movie. We are in development hell right now with Peacock has picked it up to be a TV series. So, we'll see. I'm an executive producer on it. We'll see what happens. But, right now we're just trying to find a showrunner, and, I wish that, somebody would go, I'm right over here. I can tell you how to take these 28 books and turn them into something. But it's very frustrating. So, hopefully I'll get a chance to, sit down and talk with them. I think COVID has just made everything a lot harder. So, that's what we're dealing with. But yes, we are working on it, but fingers crossed, we get out of development hell.
So. Finally, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's been great speaking with
you.
Yes, thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
And you're great interviewers. Thank you very much. And thanks to anybody watching who put up such great questions too. I appreciate it. So thank you all.
Definitely.
Have a good one. Bye.
Yeah. Okay, take care.
Please like and subscribe to the video. We'll see you next time on the Scotch Tracker. Bye for now.